El Paso, 1902. The sun dipped behind the Franklin Mountains, painting the desert landscape in amber and rust. The newly established Southern Pacific Railroad station buzzed with activity as passengers disembarked from the evening train. Among them was Dr. Thomas Harrington, a physician from Boston who had accepted a position at the newly constructed Providence Hospital. The dry heat enveloped him as he stepped onto the platform, so different from the damp chill of New England. He adjusted his collar and squinted at the distant silhouette of El Paso, a town growing rapidly since the arrival of the railroad just a few years prior. "Dr. Harrington?" a voice called. A tall man with weathered features approached. "Sheriff Malcolm Reed, welcome to El Paso." Harrington shook his hand. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't expecting a welcoming committee." "Not a committee, Doctor. I'm afraid I'm here on business." The sheriff's expression darkened. "We've had incidents. The hospital administrator thought your expertise might prove useful." As they loaded Harrington's trunks into the sheriff's wagon, Reed spoke in hushed tones. "There's something you should know before you settle in. We've had 3 children go missing in the past month, all from Mexican families living in Chihuahua. The latest was just last night. The Delgado twins, Manuel and Miguel, 7 years old." Harrington frowned. "I'm a physician, Sheriff, not a detective. These disappearances, they're not ordinary, Doctor. Each child was ill before vanishing, and each family had called for a curandera, a folk healer, before the children disappeared." The wagon rattled through the dusty streets. Mexican and Anglo businesses stood side by side along El Paso Street, while across the Rio Grande, the lights of Ciudad Juarez twinkled in the gathering darkness. "The local Mexican population is terrified," Reed continued. "They're saying it's El Robachicos, the child stealer, an old legend. But I don't believe in legends, Doctor. I believe someone is using these healing rituals to target vulnerable families." They passed a small crowd gathered outside a modest adobe home. Women were weeping, men speaking in agitated Spanish. Candles flickered in the windows. "The Delgado home," Reed said grimly. "The mother found their beds empty this morning. No signs of forced entry. No tracks outside their window." Harrington felt a chill despite the evening heat. "Why me? What can I possibly do? You come highly recommended as a man of science, but also one who respects the traditions of others. El Paso sits at a crossroads, Doctor, not just of countries, but of cultures. The Mexican families won't speak to me, but they might speak to you as a healer. And I need someone who can understand both their folk remedies and whether there's any medical significance to which children are being taken." As they approached the modest hotel where Harrington would stay until finding permanent lodgings, the doctor saw a slender figure watching from across the street, an elderly Mexican woman with piercing eyes. She made a quick sign of the cross when their gazes met. "Sheriff," Harrington said quietly, "who is that woman?" Reed followed his gaze, but the woman had vanished into the shadows. "Could be anyone. But if she was making signs against evil, she's likely one of the many who believe something unnatural is happening to these children." "And what do you believe?" Reed's face hardened as he helped unload Harrington's trunks. "I believe, Doctor, that evil needs no supernatural explanation. Men are quite capable of monstrous acts all on their own." Later that night, as Harrington unpacked his medical bag in his hotel room, a soft knock came at his door. Opening it, he found no one, only a small burlap pouch filled with herbs and a note written in careful English. "For protection. They take the weak ones when the moon is dark. The new moon was tomorrow night." The following morning, Harrington made his way to Providence Hospital, a modest 2-story brick building gleaming new against the desert landscape. Inside, he was greeted by Dr. William Fletcher, the hospital administrator, a robust man with mutton chop whiskers and a firm handshake. "Harrington, excellent timing. I was just about to perform an autopsy that might interest you, given what Sheriff Reed has likely told you." Fletcher led him to a small examination room in the basement. On a table lay the body of a young boy, perhaps 5 years old, his skin ashen grey. "Ricardo Fuentes," Fletcher explained, pulling back the sheet. "Disappeared 3 weeks ago from Chihuahuita. Found yesterday by a rancher, half buried in an arroyo 10 miles east of town." Harrington approached the body, professional instincts taking over. "Cause of death? That's the peculiar thing." Fletcher pointed to strange marks on the child's arms and chest, small circular bruises and what appeared to be precise incisions. "These cuts aren't random. They follow a pattern I've never seen before." Harrington examined the marks closely. "Some kind of ritual? Perhaps. But look here." Fletcher directed Harrington's attention to the child's mouth. "Residue of some herbal concoction. I've extracted samples for analysis, but the local pharmacist was baffled." As they continued the examination, a nurse entered with a telegram for Fletcher. The administrator's face darkened as he read it. "What is it?" Harrington asked. "Another child has been found, alive this time. Teresa Morales, age 6. She disappeared 5 weeks ago, the first of the recent cases. She was discovered wandering near the river crossing, disoriented and malnourished." Harrington quickly washed his hands. "Where is she now?" "Being brought here." "But there's something else, Harrington. The girl hasn't spoken a word since she was found, and she bears the same strange markings as this boy." When Teresa arrived, Harrington was struck by her vacant expression. The once healthy child described by her frantic parents was now skeletal, her eyes sunken and distant. Most disturbing were the fresh marks on her arms, identical to those on Ricardo's body. As Harrington gently examined her, the girl remained unresponsive until he touched a particular mark on her inner wrist. She suddenly seized his hand with surprising strength, her eyes focusing for the first time. "La Casa de los Angeles Caídos," she whispered hoarsely, "the House of Fallen Angels." Then she began to convulse, her small body arching unnaturally. Harrington called for assistance as he struggled to hold her steady. When the seizure finally subsided, Teresa lay unconscious, her breathing shallow. From her clenched fist, Harrington extracted a small object, a polished stone disc etched with unfamiliar symbols. Later that afternoon, Harrington sought out Sheriff Rite at his office near the county courthouse. The lawman was interviewing a young Mexican woman when Harrington arrived. "This is Luisa Delgado," Rite introduced, "mother of the twins who disappeared yesterday." The woman's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but her voice was steady as she spoke through Reed's deputy, who translated. "She says both boys had fever for 3 days, the deputy relayed. "The local doctor couldn't help, so her mother-in-law called for Doña Sebastiana, a curandera from across the river." "The folk healer performed a ritual?" Harrington asked. Luisa nodded, speaking rapidly in Spanish. "A limpia, a cleansing ceremony," the deputy translated, "with herbs and prayers. The boys' fever broke that night. She checked on them at midnight, and they were sleeping peacefully. By dawn, they were gone." Harrington showed her the stone disc from Teresa's hand. Luisa gasped, crossing herself quickly. "She says it's a protection charm," the deputy said, "but it's been defiled with these markings. She says only a brujo, a sorcerer practicing dark magic, would create such a thing." After Luisa left, Harrington shared his findings from the hospital. Reed listened intently, his expression grim. "I knew these cases were connected," the sheriff said, "but this is beyond anything I have encountered." "There's something else," Harrington added. "Teresa mentioned the House of Fallen Angels." "And does that mean anything to you?" Reed shook his head. "No, but I know someone who might know. There's an old priest at the San Elizario mission who studied local folklore, Father Dominguez. We should speak with him." As they prepared to leave, Harrington noticed the small herb pouch from the previous night in his pocket. He showed it to Reed. "Someone left this at my door last night." "For protection," the note said. Reed examined it carefully. "Sage, mesquite bark, and something else." He sniffed it. "Desert marigold, common in protection charms. Seems you've caught someone's attention, Doctor." Outside, the sun blazed mercilessly as they mounted Reed's horses for the ride to San Elizario. In the distance, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, a rare promise of rain. Harrington couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched as they rode out of town, following the course of the Rio Grande toward the ancient mission. The race against time had begun. Somewhere, the Delgado twins might still be alive, but if the pattern held, they wouldn't remain so for long. The journey to San Elizario followed the Rio Grande's meandering path. 9 miles southeast of El Paso, the ancient Presidio town appeared like a mirage amid cottonwoods and dusty fields. The mission's whitewashed walls and bell tower stood sentinel over the small community, much as they had since the late 1700s. "The mission has seen its share of bloodshed," Reed remarked as they approached. "Apache raids, the Salt War of '77. Some say the ground here holds memories." Father Dominguez received them in the mission's small library, a room lined with crumbling leather-bound volumes. The elderly priest moved slowly, his cassock hanging loosely on his frail frame, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Sheriff Reed," he nodded, "and you must be the new doctor from Boston. News travels quickly, even to old missions." After Harrington explained the situation, the priest's expression grew troubled. He carefully examined the stone disc from Teresa's hand. "This is very old symbolism," he said, tracing the etched patterns. "Pre-Columbian, mixed with corrupted Catholic imagery. See here? The inverted cross beside what appears to be the Aztec symbol for sacrifice. What about the House of Fallen Angels?" Reed pressed. Father Dominguez sighed deeply. "There is an old hacienda in the foothills east of here. It was built by Don Sebastian Valverde, a Spaniard who came here in the 1840s. The locals called it La Casa de los Angeles because of the stone angels that guard its gates." "Why fallen angels?" Harrington asked. "Don Sebastian's story is disturbing. He was obsessed with preserving his youth and health. There were rumors that he practiced forbidden rites, mixing Catholic sacraments with ancient native rituals. Children from nearby villages began disappearing. When the Mexican authorities finally investigated, they found evidence of terrible ceremonies. Don Sebastian fled, but the hacienda remained. Over time, the angels at the gate fell into disrepair, their faces eroded, their wings broken. Hence, fallen angels. Harrington felt a chill. "You believe these modern disappearances are connected to this old hacienda?" "I cannot say for certain. But the symbols on this disc," the priest hesitated, "they are consistent with the dark rites Don Sebastian was said to practice. Rituals meant to transfer the vitality of the young, to restore health to the old." "Transfer vitality," Harrington leaned forward. "Is that why only sick children who had been treated by curanderas were taken?" "Perhaps. In the old beliefs, a child who has recovered from illness is seen as especially powerful. Their spirit has fought death and won. Such a spirit would be invaluable to someone practicing these rites." Sheriff Reed stood abruptly. "We need to find this hacienda. If the Delgado twins are there—" "You'll need help," Father Dominguez interrupted, rising slowly. "The hacienda is hidden in the foothills, and there are many false trails. I'll send for Miguel Ortiz. He knows those mountains better than anyone." Indeed, as they waited for the guide, Father Dominguez showed them an ancient manuscript, a priest's journal from the 1850s that documented the investigation into Don Sebastian's activities. "The children who were found alive," the priest translated from the faded Spanish text, "were forever changed. They spoke of a man who drank their breath and marked their skin with the sacred geometry that would guide their strength into his body." Harrington studied the crude drawings in the margin, circular patterns of dots and lines that matched the marks on Ricardo's body and Teresa's arms. "The manuscript mentions a specific alignment of stars," Father Dominguez continued. "When the moon is dark and Mictlantecutli, the Aztec lord of death, rules the sky. During these nights, the barrier between life and death is thinnest, and the transfer of vital energy is most potent." A young Mexican man appeared at the doorway, Miguel Ortiz, their guide. His face was solemn as Father Dominguez explained their mission. "I know of this place." Miguel said quietly. My grandfather called it El Lugar Maldito, the cursed place. No one goes there, but I will take you. As they prepared to leave, Father Dominguez pressed a small silver crucifix into Harrington's hand. Whatever awaits you at the hacienda follows no god I recognize, but perhaps this will still offer some protection. Outside, the afternoon was waning, the mountains to the east already cast in shadow. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the promised storm drawing closer. We should reach the foothills by nightfall, Miguel said, mounting his horse. But the storm will make the trails treacherous. Harrington secured his medical bag and the silver crucifix. The Delgado twins have been missing for over 24 hours now. If this ritual follows the same pattern as the others, then we don't have much time, Reed finished grimly. Let's ride. As they departed, Harrington glanced back at the mission. Father Dominguez stood watching, making the sign of the cross, as they rode east toward the gathering storm and whatever waited for them at the house of fallen angels. None of them noticed the slender figure observing from the shadows of a nearby cottonwood, the same elderly woman Harrington had seen upon his arrival in El Paso. She waited until they were distant specks on the horizon before mounting her own horse to follow. Dark clouds rolled across the sky as Harrington, Reed, and Miguel Ortiz rode eastward. The air grew heavy with the scent of rain and dust. Lightning flashed in the distance, briefly illuminating the rugged terrain ahead. The storm is coming faster than I thought, Miguel called over the rising wind. We should find shelter soon. How much farther to the hacienda? Reed asked. 2 hours, maybe 3 in this weather. But there's an abandoned line shack ahead, where we can wait out the worst of it. Harrington felt the first fat raindrops strike his face. We don't have time to wait. Those boys won't be helped if we break our necks falling down a mountain in the dark, Reed interrupted. We'll rest briefly, then continue. The line shack was little more than a one-room structure of weathered wood and stone, but it offered refuge from the storm that now raged in earnest. Inside, Miguel lit a small lantern while Reed secured the horses in the lean-to at the back. You said your grandfather knew of the hacienda, Harrington said to Miguel as they dried themselves. What else did he tell you about it? Miguel's expression darkened. He said it was built on land where the ancient ones performed sacrifices, that Don Sebastian chose the location deliberately for its power. He hesitated. My grandfather was one of the men who went with the authorities to investigate. What they found there haunted him until his death. What did they find? Reed asked, returning from the lean-to. Children's bones beneath the floorboards, altars stained with blood, and journals documenting the rituals. Miguel crossed himself. Don Sebastian believed he had found the secret to eternal youth through what he called the sacred geometry of life, markings that, when placed correctly on the body, could channel a child's vitality into an adult. Harrington removed the stone disc from his pocket, studying it in the lantern light. These symbols are part of that geometry, Miguel nodded. The disc is a key of sorts. It shows where to place the marks for the ritual to work. Reed scoffed. You can't possibly believe this superstitious nonsense actually works. I don't know what to believe, Sheriff, Miguel replied evenly, but I know that my grandfather was 37 when he entered that hacienda. 2 days later, his hair had turned completely white, and his hands shook like an old man's. Something in that place broke something inside him. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows, thunder shaking the small structure. As Harrington moved to check that the roof wasn't leaking, he noticed something scratched into the wooden wall, a crude drawing of the same symbol on Teresa's disc. Miguel, he called, was this shack here when Don Sebastian lived in the hacienda? And Miguel examined the marking. It was built for vaqueros watching the herds, but after what happened at the hacienda, no one would work these lands. They said Don Sebastian's influence corrupted everything for miles around. Reed joined them, frowning at the symbol. If Don Sebastian died or fled over 50 years ago, who's performing these rituals now? Perhaps a disciple, Harrington suggested, or someone who discovered his methods. A sudden pounding at the door startled them all. Reed drew his revolver as Miguel cautiously approached the entrance. When he opened it, the elderly Mexican woman Harrington had seen in El Paso stood on the threshold, drenched from the storm. She entered without invitation, water streaming from her black shawl. "Doña Sebastiana," Miguel gasped, backing away. "The curandera?" Harrington asked, remembering the name from Luisa Delgado's account. "You go to your deaths," the woman said in accented English, her piercing gaze fixed on Harrington. "The hacienda is awakened again. It hungers." "You know something about the missing children," Reed said, his revolver still half raised. "Start talking, or I'll arrest you as an accomplice." The woman laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "Arrest me. I've been trying to protect the children. My healing rituals include safeguards against evil. But someone has been watching, learning which children receive my care. Then they come in the night. Why haven't you come forward before now?" Reed demanded. "Would you have believed an old Mexican curandera, Sheriff? Or would you have called me a witch and blamed me for the disappearances?" She turned to Harrington. "But you have seen the marks. You know this is no ordinary kidnapping." Harrington nodded slowly. "The ritual described in the priest's journal. You believe someone is actually performing it?" "Not someone. Something." Doña Sebastiana's voice dropped to a whisper. "Don Sebastian never left the hacienda. What he became, it is neither living nor dead. It waits in the spaces between, emerging when the stars align to feed on the young and strong." Reed holstered his weapon with an exasperated sigh. "More superstition. Call it what you will," the woman replied, "but I have tracked this evil for 50 years. Every decade or so the disappearances begin again. Always the same, children who have recovered from illness, marked with the sacred geometry, drained of life." "If you know so much, why haven't you stopped it?" Harrington asked. "I am only one old woman. The evil is strong when it feeds." She reached into her shawl and produced a small cloth bundle. "But tonight, the storm disrupts its power. Tonight, we might end it." She unwrapped the bundle, revealing dried herbs, a small bone knife, and a vial of dark liquid. "Miguel, bring me water," she commanded. As he complied, she began mixing the herbs with the liquid. "This will protect you from the worst of the hacienda's influence, but the twins have been there nearly 2 days now. If the ritual has begun, then we need to hurry," Harrington finished, gathering his things. "The storm's passing. We should go." As they prepared to leave, Doña Sebastiana drew Harrington aside. "The girl who survived, Teresa, what did she say to you?" "She mentioned the House of Fallen Angels. Then she had a seizure." The curandera nodded grimly. "The rituals leave marks on the soul as well as the body. Teresa escaped, but part of her remains trapped in the hacienda. She is a link between worlds now. Can she be helped? Perhaps, if we destroy the source of the evil." She pressed the vial of remaining liquid into his hand. "If you find the twins alive, make them drink this. It will shield their spirits from further harm." Outside, the storm had moved east, though rain still fell steadily. The full moon occasionally broke through the clouds, casting silver light across the glistening landscape. As they mounted their horses, Harrington couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. Medical science had no explanation for what they were pursuing, yet the evidence of Teresa's condition and Ricardo's markings couldn't be ignored. "The hacienda lies beyond that ridge," Miguel said, pointing to a dark line of hills ahead. "We should approach from the north, through the arroyo. There's less chance of being seen." Doña Sebastiana, now riding a horse Miguel had found tethered nearby, nodded in agreement. "The evil may be strong, but it is not all-seeing. We have surprise on our side." As they rode forward, Harrington clutched the silver crucifix Father Dominguez had given him. He was a man of science, not superstition, yet he found himself whispering a prayer to whatever power might be listening. Behind them, the last rumble of thunder faded into silence. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness, the Delgado twins waited, if they still lived at all. The hacienda emerged from the darkness like a wound in the landscape, a sprawling adobe structure with a central courtyard, its once grand facade now crumbling. True to its name, stone angels flanked the main gate, their features eroded by time and weather, broken wings reaching skyward like grasping hands. From their vantage point in the arroyo north of the property, Harrington studied the building through Reed's field glasses. A faint light flickered in one of the ground-floor windows. "Someone's there," he whispered. Reed took back the glasses for confirmation. Southeast corner. Could be an oil lamp or candles. "The ritual chamber would be below ground," Doña Sebastiana said. "Don Sebastian built secret rooms beneath the hacienda, places where the old earth power could be accessed." "How do we get in?" Harrington asked. Miguel pointed to a small outbuilding near the eastern wall. "Servants' quarters. There should be an entrance there that leads to the kitchen, less likely to be watched than the main gate." Reed checked his revolver. "Harrington, you stay here with Doña Sebastiana. Miguel and I will—" "No!" Harrington interrupted. "If the twins are alive but injured, they'll need immediate medical attention. I'm coming with you." "We all go," Doña Sebastiana declared, her tone brooking no argument. "Each has a role to play if we are to end this evil." They left the horses secured in the arroyo and approached the hacienda on foot. The rain had stopped, but clouds still obscured the moon, providing welcome cover as they crossed the open ground to the servants' quarters. The small adobe building was abandoned, its wooden door hanging from a single hinge. Inside, dust and debris covered the floor, except for a narrow path that showed recent use. "Someone's been through here," Reed whispered, drawing his revolver. The path led to a connecting door that opened into the hacienda's kitchen, a large room with a massive hearth and stonework surfaces. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, illuminating ancient cooking implements still hanging on the walls. As they moved cautiously through the kitchen toward the main house, Harrington noticed markings carved into the wooden support beams, the same symbols from Teresa's disc and the line shack wall. "The whole house is part of the ritual," Doña Sebastiana murmured, following his gaze. "The sacred geometry extends throughout the structure, channeling and amplifying the power." A faint sound reached them, a child's whimper, quickly muffled, coming from somewhere below. "There!" Miguel pointed to a heavy wooden door partially concealed behind a storage cabinet. "That must lead to the cellar." Reed moved the cabinet aside with Miguel's help, revealing a door secured with an iron padlock. New, unlike the ancient fixtures around it. "Stand back!" Reed ordered, aiming his revolver at the lock. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. The lock shattered, pieces of metal skittering across the stone floor. They froze, listening for any response to the noise, but the hacienda remained silent. Reed pulled the door open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The smell that wafted up was a mixture of damp earth, candle wax, and something metallic that Harrington recognized all too well from his medical practice. Blood. Doña Sebastiana produced a small packet of herbs from her shawl, whispering words in a language Harrington didn't recognize as she cast them down the staircase. "For protection," she explained, "and to cloud the senses of what waits below." Reed led the way, revolver ready. Harrington followed, medical bag in one hand, Father Dominguez's crucifix in the other. Miguel and Doña Sebastiana came last, the curandera continuing to murmur incantations. The staircase ended in a long corridor lit by iron sconces holding candles. The flickering light revealed more symbols carved into the earthen walls, elaborate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the unsteady illumination. "This way," Reed whispered, indicating where the candles continued down the right-hand passage. The corridor opened into a large chamber that had once been a wine cellar. The original storage niches in the walls now held different contents: anatomical drawings, jars containing unidentifiable specimens, and books with cracked leather bindings. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, its surface stained dark and etched with more symbolic patterns. But what drew their attention was at the far end of the chamber, a smaller room separated by a heavy iron grill. Behind the bars, two small figures huddled together on a pallet of straw. "Manuel! Miguel!" Harrington called softly, rushing forward. The Delgado twins raised their heads weakly. Their faces were pale, their eyes sunken. Both boys had fresh markings on their arms and chests, precise circles and lines that matched those on Teresa and Ricardo's bodies. "Doctor," one of the twins whispered in English. "He took our blood. Said he needs more tonight." Reed examined the grill. "Locked. Miguel, help me find something to break this open." As they searched for tools, Doña Sebastiana joined Harrington at the grill. "The ritual has begun," she said grimly, examining the twins' markings. "But it is not complete. We may yet save them." "What exactly is this ritual?" Harrington asked, passing his water canteen through the bars to the boys. Don Sebastian discovered that life energy flows through specific channels in the body. By marking these channels on a young, strong subject, then connecting them to his own body through blood transfusion, he could absorb their vitality. Blood transfusion? Harrington's medical mind raced. That's actual science, not mysticism. Primitive and dangerous, but based on real principles. "The ritual combines both," Doña Sebastiana replied. "The markings prepare the channels. The blood carries the energy. The sacred timing, when the stars align, completes the connection." Reed and Miguel returned with a rusted iron bar. "Stand back," Reed ordered, wedging the bar in the grill's lock mechanism. With Miguel's help, he leveraged the bar against the ancient lock until it snapped with a sharp crack. The grill swung open, and Harrington rushed to examine the twins. Their pulses were weak but steady. The markings on their skin were shallow cuts, precisely placed along veins and arterial pathways. "We need to get them out of here immediately," Harrington said, preparing to lift one of the boys. "No one is leaving," came a voice from the corridor behind them. They turned to see a figure in the doorway, a man dressed in a fine suit that might have been fashionable 50 years earlier. His face was a study in contrasts. Smooth, youthful skin stretched over a structure that somehow suggested great age. His eyes were the most disturbing feature, dark and depthless, like wells into which light fell and never returned. "Don Sebastian," Doña Sebastiana whispered. The man smiled, revealing unnaturally white teeth. "I go by Dr. Sebastian Vane now. The modern era requires modern credentials." His accent was curious, Spanish underlaid with something older. Reed raised his revolver. "Step aside. We're taking these children." "I think not, Sheriff." Vane made a subtle gesture. Reed's arm suddenly jerked, the revolver discharging into the ceiling. He dropped the weapon with a cry of pain, clutching his wrist. "The sacred geometry is everywhere in this chamber," Vane explained conversationally. "It responds to my will. Your muscles simply followed the pattern I activated." Harrington positioned himself in front of the twins. "Whatever you believe you're doing, it's murder. Ricardo Fuentes is dead because of your ritual." "Regrettable but necessary," Vane replied. "Some subjects are more resilient than others. The Delgado boys are exceptionally strong. Twins often are. Their life energy will sustain me for perhaps a decade." "How?" Harrington demanded, hoping to keep him talking while he assessed their options. "How does this ritual actually work?" Vane seemed pleased by the question. "A man of science. Excellent. The process is quite fascinating. A combination of ancient Aztec blood rituals and modern principles of energy transfer. The markings create pathways that, when activated under the correct celestial alignment, allow vital essence to flow from donor to recipient." As he spoke, Harrington noticed Miguel slowly moving along the wall toward a shelf of equipment. Doña Sebastiana had begun another quiet incantation, her fingers working something inside her shawl. "And the curanderas," Harrington pressed. "Why choose children they've treated? Their healing rituals unintentionally prepare the subjects. A body that has recently overcome illness has activated all its defensive energy, perfect for harvesting. Vane's gaze shifted to Doña Sebastiana. Though some curanderas include protective elements in their work, most inconvenient. Rite had managed to retrieve his revolver with his uninjured hand. "This ends now, Vane, or whatever your name is." Vane sighed. Such drama. "The ritual must be completed at midnight when the stars align. We have," he checked an ornate pocket watch, "approximately 20 minutes. I suggest you all wait quietly. Fighting will only make the transition more painful for the boys." As he spoke, Miguel lunged from the shadows, swinging a heavy glass jar at Vane's head. The jar connected with a sickening crack, shattering and spilling its contents, a preserved human heart floating in some solution, across the floor. Vane staggered but didn't fall, his face contorted with rage, no longer remotely human in appearance. "You'll pay for that," he snarled, his voice deepening to an unnatural register. Rite fired his revolver twice. The bullets struck Vane squarely in the chest, but instead of falling, he merely stumbled backward. Dark liquid, too dark to be natural blood, seeped from the wounds. "Mortal weapons cannot harm me," Vane growled. "I transcended such vulnerabilities decades ago." Doña Sebastiana stepped forward, holding a small object wrapped in red cloth. "But you are not immortal, Brujo. You still require the ritual. You still need the blood of innocence." Vane's expression flickered with uncertainty. "You cannot stop what is already in motion. The markings are made. The channels are open. Then we close them." Doña Sebastiana unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small obsidian knife. In one swift motion, she drew the blade across her own palm. "My blood freely given to shield theirs." She rushed to the twins, pressing her bleeding hand to their foreheads in turn, leaving a crimson mark. The boys gasped as if surfacing from deep water, their eyes suddenly more alert. Vane howled in fury and lunged toward them. Rite fired again, slowing him momentarily. Miguel grabbed one of the iron sconces from the wall, wielding the improvised weapon like a club. Harrington remembered the vial Doña Sebastiana had given him. He quickly administered the liquid to both twins, supporting their heads as they swallowed. "The sacred geometry works both ways," Doña Sebastiana called to Harrington as she faced Vane. "The channels can be reversed." Understanding dawned on Harrington. He examined the twins' markings, then looked at the symbols etched into the wooden table. They were mirror images of each other, one set designed to draw energy out, the other to receive it. "The table!" he shouted to Rite and Miguel. "We need to get Vane onto the table." Rite nodded in understanding. He and Miguel circled Vane, who watched them with predatory focus. When Miguel feinted forward, Vane turned toward him, giving Rite the opening to tackle him from behind. The two men crashed into the ancient wooden table. Vane displayed unnatural strength, throwing Rite off with ease, but Miguel was ready. He swung the iron sconce with all his might, catching Vane across the temple. The blow would have killed an ordinary man, but it merely stunned Vane, long enough for Rite to pin him against the table. "Now!" Rite shouted, struggling to hold the thrashing figure. Doña Sebastiana rushed forward, her bleeding palm pressed to Vane's forehead. "Return what was taken," she commanded in Spanish. "The blood calls to blood. The sacred geometry reverses." Vane screamed, a sound no human throat could produce. His body convulsed violently, nearly throwing Rite off again. Miguel joined the struggle, using his weight to help restrain Vane against the table's surface. Harrington watched in astonishment as the markings on the twins' skin began to glow with a faint phosphorescence. Similar lines appeared on Vane's exposed skin, pulsing with the same eerie light. "The crucifix," Doña Sebastiana called to Harrington. "Place it at the center of the pattern." Harrington took Father Dominguez's silver crucifix and pressed it to the center of the table, where a circular pattern of symbols converged. The metal sizzled against the wood, as if touching something far hotter than the ambient temperature. Vane's struggles became desperate. His face shifted between youthful smoothness and ancient cadaverous features. "No!" he shrieked. "It's taken me decades to perfect the ritual. You cannot undo it." "Your ritual ends tonight," Doña Sebastiana declared. She began an incantation that mixed Latin prayers with older, harsher syllables. As she spoke, the air in the chamber grew heavy, difficult to breathe. Harrington returned to the twins, monitoring their condition. Remarkably, color was returning to their faces. Their pulses strengthened beneath his fingers. Across the room, Vane's body arched impossibly on the table, held down by Rite and Miguel's combined strength. His skin began to wither visibly, taking on the appearance of ancient parchment. The dark fluid seeping from his bullet wounds thickened to the consistency of tar. "What's happening to him?" Rite shouted over Vane's inhuman screams. "The reversal," Doña Sebastiana answered, between phrases of her incantation. "All the life he has stolen over decades is leaving him at once." The candles in the chamber flickered violently, then extinguished simultaneously, plunging the room into darkness. Only the phosphorescent markings on Vane and the twins provided any illumination, glowing lines connecting them across the chamber like constellations. A final, terrible shriek filled the darkness. Then silence. When Rite managed to relight one of the candles, they saw what remained of Sebastian Vane, a desiccated husk that crumbled to dust when Miguel cautiously lifted his restraining hand. "Is he dead?" Harrington asked, still cradling the twins protectively. "What was left of him?" Doña Sebastiana replied. "Don Sebastian died a natural death long ago. What we faced was something he created through the rituals, a vessel sustained by stolen life force." Rite stared at the remains. "I've been sheriff for 15 years. Never seen anything like this." "Pray you never do again," Doña Sebastiana said grimly. She approached the twins, examining the markings on their skin. "The connection is broken. They will heal now." Indeed, the strange cuts were already beginning to fade, looking more like old scars than fresh wounds. Both boys were fully conscious, clinging to each other but alert. "What about Teresa?" Harrington asked. "You said part of her remains trapped here." Doña Sebastiana nodded. "The stone disc is the key. Destroy it, and the last connection will be severed." Harrington removed the disc from his pocket and placed it on the ritual table. Rite didn't hesitate. He brought the iron bar down with all his strength, shattering the stone into fragments. A wave of energy pulsed through the chamber, causing the earth walls to crack and shower them with dirt. "The hacienda is dying with its master," Doña Sebastiana warned. "We must leave quickly." Miguel lifted one twin, while Harrington took the other. Rite supported his injured wrist as they hurried back through the corridor toward the stairs. Behind them, more cracks appeared in the walls and ceiling, widening rapidly. They reached the kitchen just as the first major section of ceiling collapsed in the chamber below. The entire structure groaned around them, ancient timbers splitting under decades of strain, finally released. Outside, they ran toward the arroyo where their horses waited. They had barely reached safe distance when, with a thunderous roar, the central portion of the hacienda collapsed inward. Dust billowed into the night sky as the house of fallen angels returned to the earth from which it had risen. As they watched, the clouds parted, revealing a sky brilliant with stars. The alignment that would have completed Vane's ritual had passed. "It's over," Doña Sebastiana said softly. "After 50 years, it's finally over." Dawn was breaking as their exhausted party approached El Paso. The twins, wrapped in blankets and riding double with Harrington and Rite, had fallen into a natural, healing sleep. Their marked skin continued to improve with each passing hour, the cuts fading to faint silver lines that Harrington believed would eventually disappear completely. Word of their approach spread quickly. By the time they reached the main street, a crowd had gathered, among them Luisa Delgado, who ran forward with a cry of joy when she saw her sons. The reunion brought tears to even Reed's weathered face. Louisa embraced her children, then turned to their rescuers with expressions of gratitude no translation could enhance. Dr. Fletcher was waiting at Providence Hospital to examine the twins, and Teresa Morales, who had awakened from her catatonic state the moment the stone disc was destroyed. Fletcher listened to Harrington's clinical explanation with skepticism. Blood transfer rituals, sacred geometry. Harrington, you can't possibly believe such nonsense. I believe in what I witnessed, Harrington replied calmly. Whether the explanation is mystical or merely an undiscovered scientific principle, the effects were real enough. Fletcher shook his head. Your official report will need to be more conventional. The hospital board won't fund a physician who speaks of magic and rituals. Then my report will state that the children were victims of a delusional individual practicing primitive blood transfusions, who fortunately succumbed to his own misguided experiments. Harrington smiled thinly. Technically accurate, if incomplete. Teresa's recovery was remarkable. When Harrington visited her later that day, she was sitting up in bed, coloring with crayons one of the nurses had provided. The bad man is gone, she told Harrington simply. I don't feel him in my head anymore. No, Harrington agreed. He's gone forever. Sheriff Reed's official report was similarly circumspect, describing a kidnapper who had taken children to an abandoned hacienda where he had subjected them to unusual medical procedures before being killed in the structure's collapse. No mention was made of rituals, sacred geometry, or impossible transformations. Some truths were better left undocumented. Doña Sebastiana disappeared after their return, slipping away before Reed could question her further. Harrington wasn't surprised. The curandera had her own community to protect, and official recognition would likely bring more scrutiny than assistance. 1 week later, as Harrington was organizing his new office at Providence Hospital, a small package arrived, delivered by a Mexican boy who vanished before Harrington could ask who sent it. Inside was a cloth bundle containing dried herbs, a small silver medallion, and a note in careful script for protection. The evil at the hacienda is ended, but other shadows remain in the borderlands. Your eyes are opened now. You will see what others cannot. When you do, burn these herbs and remember what you learned. The sacred geometry exists in all things, for healing as well as harm. D.S. Harrington placed the bundle in his desk drawer, next to Father Dominguez's crucifix, which he had tried to return only to be told, "Keep it, Doctor. I suspect you'll have more need of it than an old priest in a quiet mission." That evening, as Harrington walked back to his lodgings, he passed the Delgado home. The windows glowed with warm light, and he could hear children's laughter inside, a sound that had nearly been silenced forever. El Paso continued to grow around him, a city at the crossroads of nations and cultures. In the hospital, Harrington treated patients from both sides of the border, learning from local healers, even as he introduced modern medical practices. Sometimes, late at night, he would examine the fading scar on his own palm, where he had cut himself during the struggle at the hacienda, his blood mingling with Doña Sebastiana's on the ritual table. The wound had healed quickly, too quickly perhaps, and occasionally, when he placed his hand on a patient suffering from fever or infection, he felt a curious warmth flow through that scar. But that was another story, for another time. 6 months passed. El Paso's growth continued unabated as new railroads brought commerce and settlers to the bustling border town. Providence Hospital expanded with a new wing dedicated to treating the increasing population. Harrington had settled into his role, earning respect from both the Anglo and Mexican communities. His willingness to incorporate traditional healing practices alongside modern medicine broke down barriers his predecessors had encountered. The Delgado twins had recovered completely. The ritual markings faded to nearly invisible traces. Teresa Morales had returned to school and showed no lasting effects from her ordeal beyond occasional nightmares. To most of El Paso, the tragic kidnappings were becoming a fading memory. But Harrington knew better. It began with subtle changes he noticed in himself. The scar on his palm occasionally throbbed when he was near seriously ill patients. When he touched them, their symptoms often improved rapidly, too rapidly for conventional medicine to explain. Then came the dreams, vivid visions of patterns and symbols, similar to those he had seen in the hacienda. He would wake with his hand burning, equations and anatomical drawings fresh in his mind that he felt compelled to document before they faded. One morning in May 1903, Harrington was awakened by an urgent knocking. Sheriff Rite stood at his door, looking troubled. "Sorry to disturb you, Doctor, but I need your expertise. There's been an incident at the Santos family farm outside town." On the ride to the farm, Rite explained that 16-year-old Javier Santos had been found unconscious in the family's barn, covered in self-inflicted markings. His father says he's been acting strangely for weeks, collecting old books, drawing symbols. Yesterday, he locked himself in the barn. When they broke in this morning, they found him like this. The Santos farmhouse was a modest adobe structure with outlying buildings for livestock. The family waited anxiously as Rite led Harrington to the barn. Javier lay on a makeshift pallet, his parents keeping vigil. The boy's arms, chest, and face were covered in markings, crude approximations of the sacred geometry Harrington had seen at the hacienda, drawn with what appeared to be chicken blood and dirt. "Has he regained consciousness?" Harrington asked, kneeling to examine the boy. "Briefly," Mr. Santos replied through Reed's translation. "He spoke of voices from the old hacienda. He said he found papers buried near the ruins." Harrington's blood ran cold. "What papers?" Mr. Santos produced a leather portfolio from beneath the pallet. Inside were brittle, yellowed pages covered in Spanish text and diagrams, unmistakably Don Sebastian's notes on the ritual. "Javier has always been interested in the old stories," Mrs. Santos explained tearfully. "When he heard about the children rescued from the haunted hacienda, he became obsessed. He would ride out there for hours." Harrington examined the boy carefully. Unlike the precise clinical markings on the kidnapped children, Javier's were amateurish, but concerning in their intentionality. The boy had been trying to recreate the ritual. "He needs to be moved to the hospital," Harrington decided. "These wounds need proper cleaning, and I'm concerned about blood loss." As they prepared to transport Javier, his eyes suddenly snapped open. He grabbed Harrington's wrist with surprising strength. "I can feel it," the boy whispered in Spanish. "The power in the earth beneath the hacienda. He found it first, but anyone can use it. Anyone can become like him." Harrington carefully disengaged the boy's grip. "Javier, you're suffering from blood loss and possible infection. These rituals aren't something to experiment with. You know?" Javier's eyes focused intensely on Harrington's face. "You felt it too. I can see it in you, the connection. You touched the sacred geometry, and it changed you." Harrington stepped back, unsettled by the boy's perception. "Sheriff, let's get him to town immediately." Later, with Javier sedated in the hospital, Harrington examined Don Sebastian's papers in the privacy of his office. Most were in archaic Spanish that he struggled to translate, but the diagrams were clear enough. Detailed mappings of how the sacred geometry connected to human anatomy. One passage, partially translated by Father Dominguez at Harrington's request, was particularly disturbing. "The ritual does not create power. It merely channels what already exists in the earth beneath us. The ancients knew these pathways of force. They built their temples upon them. The hacienda stands at a convergence of such pathways. But I have discovered that one who has participated in the ritual carries its echo within them forever. They become a living conduit, capable of sensing and directing these energies without the elaborate preparations I once thought necessary." Harrington's hand went instinctively to the scar on his palm. Was this what he had been experiencing? Had his involvement in reversing the ritual somehow connected him to these pathways of force? A knock at his office door interrupted his thoughts. Doña Sebastiana entered without waiting for permission. the first time Harrington had seen her since the night at the hacienda. "You've felt it," she said without preamble. "The changes." Harrington didn't bother denying it. "What's happening to me? What I feared might happen." She sat across from him, her piercing gaze undiminished by age. "When your blood joined mine on the ritual table, you became part of the sacred geometry, a node in the pattern. And what does that mean exactly? It means you can channel the energies Don Sebastian sought to harness, but unlike him, you can do so for healing rather than harm." She nodded toward the hospital ward. "You've noticed it already with your patients. These energies, what are they? Some form of electromagnetic force, a chemical reaction we don't yet understand." Doña Sebastiana smiled slightly. Always the scientist. "Does the name matter?" The Aztecs called it Teotl, the fundamental energy of the universe. Your European alchemists named it the quintessence. Modern science may someday find another term. "And the boy? Javier?" Her expression darkened. "A warning. The knowledge of the ritual cannot be destroyed so easily. Don Sebastian's papers should have burned with the hacienda. Now they've found another searching mind. He was just curious, experimenting, as was Don Sebastian once. Evil rarely begins with malice, Doctor. It begins with curiosity unchecked by wisdom." She leaned forward. "The boy must be taught, as must you." "Taught what?" "Control, understanding. The sacred geometry responds to intention. Yours is to heal. That's why your gift manifests when you touch the sick, but it can be directed toward other purposes if you don't learn to master it." Harrington stared at the scar on his palm, remembering the curious warmth he felt when treating patients. "You're suggesting I become your apprentice? Study curanderismo?" "I'm suggesting you acknowledge that your science doesn't yet have explanations for everything you've witnessed." She rose to leave. "The boy will recover physically. His mind is another matter. Watch him carefully." "And what about Teresa and the twins? Are they also changed?" "They were vessels, not participants. Their connection was severed when the ritual reversed, but they may retain sensitivity to such energies." She paused at the door. "Come to my home across the river when you're ready to learn. Your patients might benefit from a doctor who understands both worlds." After she left, Harrington returned to Javier's bedside. The boy slept peacefully now, the crude markings cleaned and bandaged. Harrington placed his scarred palm on the boy's forehead, feeling the now familiar warmth flow between them. Javier's breathing deepened, his fever noticeably receding. Science or sacred geometry, medicine or magic. Perhaps the borderlands offered a third path, one that acknowledged the wisdom in both traditions. Outside the hospital window, El Paso continued its transformation from frontier town to modern city. But beneath the new electric streetlights and telephone wires, older forces remained, forces that flowed through the land like the Rio Grande itself, invisible until they found channels to follow. And in a small office at Providence Hospital, a doctor from Boston began to map those channels in his own way, creating a new sacred geometry of healing. Autumn came to the borderlands, bringing cooler temperatures and clear, brilliant skies. Harrington had established a routine of visiting Doña Sebastiana twice weekly, crossing the international bridge to her modest home in Ciudad Juarez. Their sessions were unlike any medical training he had received at Harvard. The elderly curandera taught him to recognize the energy pathways in the human body, channels that corresponded surprisingly well with the nervous and circulatory systems he had studied in anatomy, yet with subtle differences. "Your medical science sees the physical conduits," she explained, "but not what flows through them beyond blood and electrical impulses." Harrington found himself drawing connections between her traditional knowledge and recent scientific discoveries, the emerging understanding of electromagnetic fields, the mysterious properties of radium that the Curies were investigating in Paris, the unseen energies that seemed to permeate the natural world. Javier Santos had recovered physically, but his fascination with Don Sebastian's papers remained. Harrington had persuaded the boy's parents to let him become an apprentice at the hospital, partly to keep him occupied with legitimate healing practices, partly to keep him under observation. "The boy has natural talent," Doña Sebastiana admitted during one session. "But his ambition exceeds his wisdom, much like Don Sebastian himself." "I've been meaning to ask," Harrington said. "Your name, Sebastiana. Is there a connection?" The curandera's expression grew distant. "Don Sebastian was my father. My mother was a Maya woman who served in his household. When his experiments began to consume him, she fled with me to her people. Years later, when I heard of the children disappearing, I returned to stop what he had become." This revelation stunned Harrington. "Then your knowledge of the rituals comes from the same source, yes. But where he sought power, I sought understanding." She touched the silver medallion she always wore. "We are shaped by our choices, Doctor, not our blood." As winter approached, Harrington's unusual healing abilities became more pronounced. Patients who should have succumbed to pneumonia recovered rapidly under his care. Infections cleared without the expected complications. The hospital board noticed the remarkable outcomes, but attributed them to his modern medical practices rather than anything supernatural. Sheriff Rite, however, was more perceptive. "You've changed since that night at the hacienda," he remarked during one of their regular chess games. "Don't think I haven't noticed how your more desperate cases have a habit of turning around." Harrington moved his knight carefully. "Medical science advances every day." "And does medical science explain why your hand glows faintly when you treat Maria Gonzalez's tuberculosis?" At Harrington's startled expression, Reed smiled. "I've stood in your doorway more than once, Doctor, seen things that don't fit neatly in my report book." "What do you think you've seen exactly?" "A good man using every tool at his disposal to help others." Reed captured Harrington's bishop. "Just be careful. El Paso sits at a crossroads of more than just countries. Some folks aren't ready to accept certain realities." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knocking. Reed's deputy burst in, breathless. "Sheriff, there's been a break-in at the hospital." "The Santos boy. He's taken Dr. Harrington's research papers and some medical supplies." Harrington felt a cold dread. Among those papers were his notes on Don Sebastian's ritual documents, carefully translated and annotated over the past months. "When?" Reed demanded, already reaching for his gun belt. "Not an hour ago. And that's not all. He took Teresa Morales from the children's ward, where she was being treated for influenza." Harrington stood abruptly. "We need to find them immediately. I think I know where they've gone." The ruins of the hacienda had become an object of morbid curiosity in the months since its collapse. Despite warnings from authorities, locals and tourists alike would ride out to view the remains of the notorious structure. As Harrington, Reed, and two deputies approached on horseback, the setting sun cast long shadows across the rubble. Most of the hacienda had returned to the earth, but portions of the outer walls still stood, creating a jagged silhouette against the darkening sky. "There," Reed pointed to a flicker of light among the ruins, a lantern or campfire. They approached cautiously, tethering their horses at a distance. As they crept closer, voices became audible, Javier's adolescent tones mixed with Teresa's higher pitch. "She doesn't sound frightened," one deputy whispered. "She wouldn't be," Harrington replied grimly. "She's been through the ritual before." Part of her would be drawn back to it. They reached a vantage point overlooking what had once been the hacienda's courtyard. In the center, Javier had cleared away debris to expose a section of the original stone flooring. Teresa sat calmly at the edge of this clearing, watching as the young man drew familiar symbols in chalk around a central circle. Nearby lay Harrington's research papers, Don Sebastian's original documents, and what appeared to be medical equipment, syringes, tubing, and glass bottles. "He's recreating the blood transfer aspect of the ritual," Harrington whispered to Reed. "But without the complete sacred geometry of the hacienda to channel it, I don't know what will happen." "Nothing good, I'd wager," Reed replied. "Let's stop this now," Before they could move, Teresa suddenly looked directly at their hiding place. "They're here," she announced calmly. Javier looked up from his work, unsurprised. "Let them come. Perhaps the doctor would like to see what his student has learned." Reed and the deputies drew their weapons as Harrington stepped into the clearing. "Javier, this is dangerous. You don't understand the forces you're manipulating." The young man smiled. "I understand better than you think, Doctor. Don Sebastian's notes were incomplete, but when combined with your research and what Teresa remembers," he gestured to the patterns chalked on the stone, "I've improved the design. No need for months of preparation or celestial alignment." "Oh, Teresa, come here," Harrington called gently to the girl. She looked at him with unnervingly adult eyes. "It doesn't hurt, Doctor. It feels like going home." "What have you done to her?" Reed demanded, his revolver trained on Javier. "Nothing yet. She came willingly. She remembers the connection, how it felt to be part of something greater than herself." Javier's expression was almost compassionate. "Don't you feel it too, Doctor? The potential? We're meant to harness these energies, not fear them." Harrington noticed that the chalk symbols had been drawn to include the entire clearing. They were all standing within the ritual space now. "Sheriff, get back," he warned, but it was too late. Javier slashed his palm with a scalpel and pressed it to the central stone. The chalk lines began to glow with the same phosphorescence Harrington remembered from the hacienda's chamber. Reed and the deputies stumbled backward, but invisible forces held them within the circle. Teresa remained seated, watching with calm interest. Only Harrington found he could still move freely within the pattern. "You see?" Javier laughed. "Your connection protects you as mine protects me. We're conduits, Doctor, living nodes in the sacred geometry." "This isn't a game, Javier. Don Sebastian destroyed himself with these experiments. Because he was selfish. He wanted the power for himself alone." Javier gestured expansively. "I want to understand it, to share it. Imagine what we could accomplish. Healing beyond anything modern medicine dreams possible, perhaps even mastery over death itself." "At what cost?" Harrington demanded. "Every ritual has a price. What are you offering in exchange for this power?" Javier's expression faltered briefly. "A small sacrifice. Teresa understands." Harrington looked to the girl, who nodded serenely. "My blood carries the memory of the ritual," she said. "It will help open the pathway permanently." Understanding dawned on Harrington. "You're trying to create a permanent conduit to these energies, a doorway that won't close." "Exactly." Javier's eyes shone with fervor. "No more scrabbling for fragments of power, a true merger of science and the sacred." "You have no idea what might come through such a doorway," Harrington said quietly. "Some boundaries exist for a reason." As they spoke, the glowing lines intensified. Reed and the deputies were frozen in place now, their expressions contorted in pain. The ground beneath them trembled slightly. "It's working," Javier whispered. "Can you feel it, Doctor? The pathway's opening?" Harrington could indeed feel something, a pressure building beneath them, energies stirring that had lain dormant since the hacienda's destruction. His scarred palm burned intensely. "Stop this now, Javier, before it's too late." "Too late? We've barely begun!" The young man raised his bleeding hand. One final component, the blood of one who's passed through death's door and returned. He reached for Teresa with the scalpel. In that moment, Harrington made his decision. He lunged forward, his scarred palm extended. When it connected with Javier's chest, both men gasped as energy surged between them. Harrington felt the full force of his months of training with Doña Sebastiana flowing through him. Instead of channeling healing energy, he reversed the flow, drawing power away from Javier's ritual, through his own body, and into the earth beneath them. The chalk lines flickered, their glow dimming. Javier struggled against Harrington's grip, his face contorted in rage and disbelief. "What are you doing? You'll ruin everything." "I'm closing the door you tried to open," Harrington replied, through gritted teeth. The effort was tremendous, pain lancing through his body as he channeled energies never meant for a single human conduit. The ground shook more violently. Cracks appeared in the stone floor, spreading outward from where they stood. Reed and the deputies were suddenly released from their paralysis, staggering backward as the ritual circle disintegrated. "Get Teresa! Get out of here!" Harrington shouted to them, still maintaining his grip on Javier. Reed scooped up the girl and retreated with his men to safer ground. Javier fought wildly now, the zealot's fervor replaced by panic. "Let me go! The whole structure is collapsing." Indeed, the remaining walls of the hacienda were crumbling around them, as if whatever force had held them together was finally dissipating completely. "Not until it's finished," Harrington insisted. He could feel the pathways closing, the unnatural energies returning to dormancy. But the effort was taking its toll. Darkness edged his vision, his heart pounding dangerously. With a final surge of will, Harrington channeled every bit of energy from Javier's failed ritual into the earth. The chalk symbols flared once more, then vanished entirely. Javier collapsed unconscious to the ground. Harrington's legs gave way beneath him. As he fell, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure watching from beyond the ruins. Doña Sebastiana, her hands raised in a gesture he recognized from their training sessions. She was helping him close the pathways. The last thing Harrington saw before consciousness fled was the night sky above, brilliant with stars, but natural ones, untouched by supernatural energies or ancient rituals. Just the ordinary miracle of the cosmos, which suddenly seemed miracle enough. Harrington awoke in his own hospital room 3 days later. Dr. Fletcher sat beside his bed, reviewing medical charts with a puzzled expression. "Ah, you're back with us," Fletcher said, noticing Harrington's open eyes. "You've given us quite the medical mystery, Thomas." Harrington's throat was parched. After accepting water from Fletcher, he asked, "Teresa, Javier?" "The girl is fine, frighteningly so given her ordeal, not a scratch on her." Fletcher adjusted his spectacles. "The Santos boy is stable. Whatever happened out there affected him profoundly. Physically, he's recovering well, but mentally, he hasn't spoken since they brought him in." Struggling to sit up, Harrington winced at the pain in his chest. "And what's my diagnosis?" "That's the peculiar thing. By all measures, you experienced something akin to severe electrical shock. Your heart actually stopped briefly when they brought you in." Fletcher shook his head in wonderment. "Sheriff Reed performed chest compressions until you started breathing again. Said he'd seen it done in Chicago once. I'll have to thank him." "Indeed, though I'm at a loss to explain what caused your condition. There was no lightning reported that night." Harrington managed a weak smile. "Perhaps some questions are best left to philosophy rather than medicine." Fletcher patted his shoulder. "Rest now. Whatever happened has left you severely depleted. It will be weeks before you're fit to resume your duties." After Fletcher left, Harrington examined his palm. The scar remained, but it had changed, faded to a silvery line that no longer burned or throbbed. Whatever connection it had represented seemed dormant now, if not severed entirely. Visitors came regularly during his convalescence. Sheriff Reed brought chess and news of the town. The Delgado family brought traditional healing foods prepared by Luisa. Even Father Dominguez made the journey from San Elizario, bringing books to occupy Harrington's active mind. But it was Doña Sebastiana's visit, late one evening after other visitors had gone, that Harrington had been both anticipating and dreading. "You closed the pathways," she said without preamble, settling into the chair beside his bed, "at considerable risk to yourself." "You helped," Harrington replied. "I saw you there at the end." She nodded. "I felt the disturbance. The boy nearly succeeded in creating a permanent breach, a doorway that would have allowed energies to flow unchecked between worlds. Would that have been so terrible? The power to heal is not the only thing that would have come through," she interrupted firmly. "There is a natural order, a balance. Don Sebastian's obsession with immortality led him to disrupt that balance. The boy would have done worse, with the best of intentions." Harrington looked down at his altered scar. "My abilities, They're gone, aren't they? Not gone. Returned to their proper scale. Doña Sebastiana's expression softened slightly. You remain a gifted healer, Doctor. But now you will heal as humans are meant to, with knowledge, compassion, and the occasional quiet miracle that medicine cannot quite explain. And Javier? His connection was severed more violently. In time, he may recover his faculties. Whether he will remember what happened, she shrugged. Perhaps it is better if he does not. And Teresa? The twins? Children are remarkably resilient. Already the experience fades for them, becoming like a strange dream. She rose to leave. My work in the borderlands is finished. Don Sebastian's legacy is finally laid to rest. You're leaving? Harrington was surprised by his own disappointment. My people in Chiapas have need of me. The sacred geometry exists throughout our lands, Doctor. There are other sites, other potential breaches that require watching. She placed a small cloth bundle on his bedside table. Herbs for strength during your recovery. And this... She removed the silver medallion she always wore and placed it beside the herbs. A reminder of boundaries that should be respected, but also of bridges that can be built between different ways of knowing. After she departed, Harrington examined the medallion. One side bore Catholic imagery, the Virgin of Guadalupe. The reverse showed a pattern he recognized from his studies with Doña Sebastiana, an ancient Maya symbol representing the flow of energies between worlds contained within a protective circle. Science and tradition, physical and metaphysical, different approaches to the same fundamental mysteries of existence. Spring 1904. The desert bloomed briefly after winter rains, carpeting the Franklin Mountains with wildflowers. El Paso continued its transformation, new buildings rising, streets being paved, the border town evolving into a modern American city. Harrington had fully recovered, resuming his duties at Providence Hospital with renewed dedication. If his patients noticed that his miraculous healing touch had become less dramatic, they said nothing. He remained an exceptional physician, combining scientific rigor with a holistic approach unusual for doctors of his generation. Javier Santos had eventually regained his speech and most of his memories, though the night at the hacienda ruins remained a blank space in his mind. Harrington had taken a special interest in the young man's education, arranging for him to study nursing under the hospital's supervision. Javier's natural aptitude for healing remained, channeled now into more conventional medical practices. Teresa Morales had returned to normal childhood activities, though sometimes Harrington would catch her staring at empty spaces as if seeing things invisible to others. Her parents reported occasional sleepwalking episodes, during which she would draw strange symbols in the dust before waking with no recollection. These incidents became less frequent as months passed, and by her 8th birthday had ceased entirely. The Delgado twins thrived, showing no lasting effects from their ordeal. Manuel had developed an interest in medicine, often visiting the hospital to observe Harrington at work. Miguel preferred mechanics, displaying an uncanny ability to repair complex machinery. Whether these talents were natural or consequences of their experience, Harrington couldn't say. On a warm April evening, Harrington sat on the porch of his newly purchased home on the outskirts of El Paso, reviewing patient notes as the sun set behind the mountains. Sheriff Reed arrived on horseback, dismounting with the stiffness of a man who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. "Evening, Doctor. Mind if I join you?" Harrington gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Please, you look exhausted." Reed settled heavily into the chair, accepting the glass of whiskey Harrington offered. "Just rode back from Ciudad Juarez. There's been trouble along the border. Smugglers moving more than just tequila across the river. Weapons. Artifacts." Reed took a long swallow of whiskey. "Pre-Columbian relics from sites further south. Apparently, there's a market for such things among wealthy collectors back east." Harrington felt a familiar unease. "What kind of artifacts?" Stone tablets, ceremonial objects, things with symbols that looked familiar. Reed studied Harrington's expression. Reminded me of those markings from our adventure last year. The sacred geometry, Harrington murmured. That's what I thought. But here's the strange part. The smuggler we caught was babbling about opening doorways and pathways between worlds. Sounded like Javier that night. Harrington set aside his patient notes. You think there's a connection? I think knowledge has a way of spreading, especially dangerous knowledge. Reed finished his whiskey. The man mentioned a European buyer who's been collecting these artifacts for years. A Professor Ellsworth from the University of Pennsylvania. The name triggered a memory. I know him, by reputation at least. He's an archaeologist specializing in Mesoamerican civilizations. Published some controversial papers suggesting connections between ancient rituals and empirical effects on physical health. Sounds like someone who might be interested in what happened here. Harrington nodded slowly. The kind of man who might piece together fragments from different sources and begin to understand the bigger picture. The kind of man who might try to recreate what Don Sebastian discovered, Reed added grimly. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the mountains. Finally, Harrington spoke. I've been corresponding with colleagues in Europe about some of my observations here, presented as theoretical, of course. There are scientists studying phenomena that might explain what we experienced. Nikola Tesla speaks of energies that permeate the environment. The Curies have discovered elements that emit mysterious radiations. You think science will eventually explain it all? Harrington smiled slightly. I think the boundaries between science and what we call supernatural are not as fixed as we once believed. The universe contains more wonders than our current frameworks can accommodate. Reed chuckled. That's a diplomatic way of saying we don't know what the hell happened out there. Perhaps, but I've learned that admitting what we don't know is the beginning of wisdom. Harrington touched the silver medallion he now wore beneath his shirt. Doña Sebastiana's parting gift. There are forces in this world that respond to human intention, whether we channel them through ritual or laboratory equipment. And that's why I rode out here tonight, Reed said, his expression growing serious. I think someone else is learning that lesson. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded newspaper, the El Paso Herald, from the previous day. A small article was circled in pencil. Archaeological expedition to investigate local ruins. Harrington read it quickly. Professor Ellsworth was coming to El Paso next month to study sites of historical significance related to Spanish colonial activities and their intersection with indigenous practices. The Hacienda ruins, Harrington said. Reed nodded. Among others. But given what we know, he might be looking for more than historical documentation. Harrington folded the newspaper thoughtfully. What do you propose we do? I was hoping you might have some ideas. My jurisdiction ends at explanations involving flesh and blood criminals. Once we start talking about energies and doorways, I'm out of my depth. Harrington considered for a moment. We should meet with him when he arrives, offer our assistance with his research. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I wouldn't call him an enemy yet, just someone who needs to understand the responsibilities that come with certain knowledge. Harrington recalled Doña Sebastiana's words about boundaries and bridges. Some doors are meant to remain closed or at least carefully guarded. Reed stood to leave. Will you handle the professor? I'll keep an eye out for more smugglers bringing in these artifacts. Oh, as the sheriff mounted his horse, Harrington called after him, Malcolm, do you ever regret being part of this, knowing what we know now? Reed adjusted his hat, considering the question. Some nights, when I can't sleep. But then I remember those twins, alive because we were there. Teresa recovering instead of ending up like Ricardo. He shrugged. Knowledge is a burden sometimes, but ignorance can be a greater one. After Reed departed, Harrington remained on the porch, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. He found himself automatically identifying the constellations that Don Sebastian had considered significant for his rituals. The universe operated according to patterns and principles, some understood by modern science, others known through ancient wisdom. Perhaps the true path forward lay in recognizing that these were different perspectives on the same underlying reality. Harrington returned inside and opened a drawer in his desk, removing a leather-bound journal he had started after recovering from the incident at the hacienda ruins. In it, he'd been documenting his observations about the borderlands, not just medical cases, but the subtle energies he could still sometimes perceive, the patterns that emerged in seemingly unrelated events, the connections between physical symptoms and spiritual states that conventional medicine ignored. On a fresh page, he wrote, April 15th, 1904, news of Professor Ellsworth's expedition. The knowledge of the sacred geometry continues to spread, despite our efforts to contain it. Perhaps containment was never the right approach. Perhaps understanding and responsible stewardship are what's needed. The borderlands have always been a place where worlds meet, nations, cultures, languages. Why not also the visible and invisible, the known and unknown? Every boundary is also a potential bridge. What happened at the hacienda was a warning about the dangers of pursuing power without wisdom, but it also revealed possibilities for healing that transcend our current understanding. The pathways remain, flowing beneath the surface of our ordinary reality. Those of us who have glimpsed them bear a responsibility to ensure they are approached with proper respect and caution. I believe this is why I was brought to El Paso, not merely to practice medicine, but to serve as a guardian of sorts, one who understands both worlds and can help navigate between them. Harrington closed the journal and placed it back in the drawer. Tomorrow would bring its usual rounds of patients, medical challenges to solve through science and skill. But beneath those everyday concerns flowed deeper currents, the sacred geometry of existence that connected all things. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the mountains, another spring storm approaching. Harrington touched the silver medallion at his throat and smiled slightly. Some boundaries were meant to be respected, but others existed to be crossed with proper preparation and humility. The borderlands had taught him that, and he suspected they had much more yet to teach. As lightning flashed on the horizon, briefly illuminating the desert landscape, Harrington thought he saw a familiar figure watching from the road, an elderly woman in a black shawl. But when he blinked, she was gone, leaving only the empty road and the approaching storm. Whether vision or reality hardly mattered. The message remained the same. The work continued, the vigil unended. In El Paso, where worlds collided and merged, the delicate balance between forces seen and unseen required constant attention. And in his small way, with his medical bag and his hard-won wisdom, Thomas Harrington would do his part to maintain that balance. Healing bodies and occasionally something more, bridging science and mystery in the borderlands where both held equal sway.